So of course at the end of the year you see people's top 10 lists, and to me I always felt a bit weird trying to compare films from such varied genres. That's why I thought it might be more interesting to break down my favorite movies of 2018 by genre. I won't be too nitpicky about what falls into what category, and obviously some movies are hard to categorize. I'm also going to generally go by when a film got its relatively wide US release, so some of these might be listed as 2017 on Wikipedia or IMDb. First, I'll start with one of my favorite genres, science fiction. This one has a pretty clear choice for my favorite of the year, and that's Alex Garland's Annihilation. It's easily the most intelligent and cerebral sci-fi film of 2018, and has amazing, although at times very creepy visuals, and excellent sound design as well. The visuals are especially impressive in the film's surreal final act, and even the end credits have trippy stuff going on. Director Alex Garland, who also made Ex Machina, has proven himself to be one of the best science fiction filmmakers currently working. He got performances out of his cast that are subtle but effective all around. Sadly, the only other science fiction film I liked this year was the much more conventional Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One. I had low expectations going in, but I had a blast watching this on the big screen. I will say, this doesn't hold up as much upon a second home viewing, which keeps it from coming close to Annihilation. But on the first time watch, not knowing who or what would show up next made for a really fun experience, especially when they visited a certain 80s horror film in the second act. I certainly understand some people's complaints with Ready Player One, like the uninteresting protagonist, but I had so much fun I just didn't care. I decided to put comic book superhero films in their own category, even though it's more of a subgenre at most to me, because there were enough of them to do it for the sake of this video. There's an obvious winner for me here, and that's Marvel Studios' Infinity War. A lot of podcasters I follow had significant criticisms of it, like its lack of character arcs for the heroes, but that didn't bother me as I was already so invested in them. I can see why you wouldn't like it if you have a more traditional view that a theatrically released film should stand more on its own and focus on character development, but taking it for what it is, I thought it was one of the best blockbusters in recent memory. As a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, seeing the decade-long franchise finally start to culminate was immensely satisfying. I loved watching all the different characters cross over and interact with each other. Infinity War also has some of the best action set pieces in superhero history. If I had to pick just one, Infinity War was probably my most enjoyable theatrical experience in 2018. My second favorite comic book movie of 2018 was surprisingly Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I was highly skeptical before this came out, but it blew me away with its visual inventiveness. More than any other comic adaptation, this stays true to the nature of comics, not only with its visual style, but also the fact that it seems like anything can happen at any moment. Spider-Verse shows us so many different characters and universes, but never feels convoluted. From here, there are three that are pretty close in quality and a little difficult to rank. I'd give third place just barely to Black Panther. I do think its flaws are more noticeable than the other two, Deadpool 2 and Ant-Man and the Wasp. For instance, I found the dodgy CGI to be more of a detraction than anything in either of the others. However, the high points are higher in Black Panther. It has some great performances, with some of my favorites being Michael B. Jordan's complex take on the villain, the funny and charming Letitia Wright, and Andy Serkis, who is exceptional as always. I don't think anyone in either Deadpool 2 or Ant-Man 2 can really compare. The action in Black Panther is also good, but definitely not on the level of Infinity War. Again, this next spot was hard to pick, but if I have to choose, I'm going with Deadpool 2. It did have a weak beginning, but it improves a lot once Josh Brolin's Cable becomes a major presence. Cable, as well as Domino, played by Zazie Beetz, are both terrific new additions to the Deadpool universe. I had no issues with the perfectly acceptable Ant-Man and the Wasp, but it just didn't have anything too special in it to compare with the previous films I mentioned. The new character of Ghost continues the recent trend of Marvel Studios creating villains with complex motivations that aren't just trying to rule or destroy the universe. The movie was funny with entertaining action, but it didn't have the unique feel and impressive visuals to match Black Panther. Next we have Aquaman, the most inconsistent superhero film of 2018. It's visually dazzling, and Atlantis is magnificently realized with some excellent action set pieces, but there are also multiple parts that are so very cheesy. I did enjoy how they concentrated on just making one good film as opposed to connecting to a greater universe or setting up sequels. And any movie with an octopus playing the drums can't be all bad. A lot of the supporting cast was great, like Willem Dafoe and Tamara Morrison, But Jason Momoa and Amber Heard weren't the smartest choices to carry a film, and their romance was pretty cliche. I appreciated the added humor to the DC universe, but many of the jokes fell flat. Aquaman was also a little bloated at 2 hours and 23 minutes, and there are a few too many side plots. That just leaves the woeful Venom, which suffered from an especially laborious first half that takes way too long to get to the action. When they finally do get to Venom, there are some amusing scenes, but not enough to save the movie. 2018 was a pretty good year for horror, with 3 excellent films and 2 very good ones. The top 3 are all pretty close, but for number 1, I'm going with Hereditary, the intense directorial debut from Ari Aster. Toni Collette gives one of the elite performances of the year that did earn her a Gotham Independent Film Award, but is sadly being ignored by the major awards. The editing in Hereditary is fantastic as there are several creative transitions. The disturbing film is certainly not for everyone, and there are a few moments that will shock a large percentage of viewers. It's lengthy for a horror film, but definitely justifies its runtime. Moving on to second place, and I'm not even sure if you'd call it a horror film, but I don't know what to call the absolutely bonkers Mandy from director Panos Cosmatos, whose debut was the avant-garde science fiction film Beyond the Black Rainbow. Mandy has some stunning, trippy visuals and was easily my craziest theatrical experience of 2018. A Quiet Place from director and star John Krasinski is definitely in the top 3. It has a pretty original concept and provides plenty of tension while still treating the audience with respect. It got nitpicked extensively online for supposed plot holes, but personally I found them to be largely irrelevant. Suspiria, the Luca Guadagnino remake of the 1977 film from Dario Argento, is my number 4 horror film of 2018. It's much different than the original, but still stylish with wonderful cinematography, especially in the extensive and elaborate dance sequences. I also really enjoyed the atmospheric score from Thom Yorke, the lead singer of Radiohead. Halloween, the slasher sequel starring Michael Myers that ignores all films after the original, is my number 5 in horror. There was a pointless subplot involving the Doctor, but this is still easily the best in the series since the original, and it was a delight seeing Jamie Lee Curtis back in the role. I'd also like to briefly mention The Ritual, a British film that was released on Netflix outside the UK, and Unsane, starring Claire Foy from The Crown, and directed by Steven Soderbergh, who also made Sex Lies and Videotape and Ocean's 11. 2018 wasn't that good of a year for comedy, which unfortunately has often been the case recently. There were 2 that stood above the rest, but they were both relatively small in terms of budget and release, and one was almost impossible to categorize. In terms of mainstream comedies, there wasn't much to pick from. I have to give the slight edge here for Best Comedy of 2018 to The Death of Stalin from director Armando Iannucci, the creator of the HBO political series Veep. The Death of Stalin is set in 1950s Soviet Russia in the aftermath of the death of the dictator, an unusual choice of topic for a comedic work. I loved how they didn't even make the actors try to have Russian accents and let them just use their normal manner of speaking. I've always thought it was a little silly how many Hollywood movies make actors attempt an accent even though they're unrealistically speaking English anyway. The Death of Stalin has some inspired casting, especially Steve Buscemi as Nikita Khrushchev. This is certainly a dark comedy, as it doesn't shy away from portraying the brutality of Stalin's regime. From what I've heard, the film is actually relatively historically accurate, although a few things were definitely changed. Next is the surreal Sorry to Bother You, which is less consistent than The Death of Stalin, but much more bizarre. This bold film is divisive, but I found its inventiveness to be a breath of fresh air in today's cinema that's sorely needed, especially when it comes to satire. This was hip-hop artist Boots Riley's first time directing, and his direction is surprisingly skillful and assured. He does not hold back at all in this biting critique of capitalism and modern society. It's a really good film, but not every single part works, which makes this just slightly worse than The Death of Stalin. After that, there's a huge gap in quality as we go to the next best comedies of 2018, Blockers and Tag, which I found roughly equal, with Blockers maybe just being a tiny bit better. Both of them had their moments, and there was nothing particularly bad about either, but were overall pretty forgettable and generic. Blockers also get this rating taken down a notch by those absurd CGI tears on Leslie Mann. Game Night was alright, but for me it was around a 6 out of 10 if I'm being generous. There's really only one theatrically released movie I saw in 2018 that I'd call a straight up action movie, and that's Mission Impossible Fallout. The action scenes are incredibly well choreographed, and certainly the main reason to watch Fallout. Tom Cruise is solid as usual, and Henry Cavill is lots of fun to watch as a villain. The stunts were absolutely mind blowing, especially the Halo jump. I did like the Netflix exclusive The Night Comes For Us, starring the very talented Iko Uwais from the insane martial arts films The Raid and The Raid 2. The action scenes have excellent choreography, and there were some cool supporting characters, but the rest of the film wasn't that interesting, so it definitely isn't as good as Fallout. Similarly, I only saw one Western film, and that's the Coen Brothers anthology The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Any fans of these directors would enjoy this, and some of the segments are quite amusing and entertaining. The short films have varying subject matter, but each still has that distinctive Coen Brothers feel. In the world of animation, there are two that clearly stand above the rest. I just barely have to give the top spot to a movie I already discussed, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Just below that is the highly entertaining Pixar sequel Incredibles 2. I thought for sure this was going to be my favorite animated film of the year after seeing it, as it's just such a joy from start to finish. The animation is beautifully rendered and full of details, and I really liked all the new heroes. Incredibles 2 combines spectacle and heart just as well as the original. Isle of Dogs from director Wes Anderson had stylish stop-motion animation, an incredibly talented voice cast, lots of allusions to Japanese cinema, and a delightful score from Alexander Desplat. Ralph Breaks the Internet was entertaining, but not quite as good as the original, nor is it anywhere close to the quality of the top 3 in this year's animation. The documentary genre is tough to rank this year, and there were a whole bunch of well-made docs, with a few of them doing surprisingly well at the box office. If I absolutely have to pick just one, I'll go with Free Solo, an in-depth look at rock climber Alex Honnold, who insanely uses no ropes or safety equipment. Not only is the subject matter fascinating, the film is interesting on a separate level, as it examines how the act of filming Alex may affect his climb or even result in his death. The crew could have witnessed him fall at any moment. After that, there are 3 political documentaries I found to be all basically as good as the other. The first I'll mention is RBG, about Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's entertaining and never dry while still being informative. The second is Active Measures, which goes into detail about Russian interference and has interviews from huge names like John McCain and Hillary Clinton. Not as slick as the others, but no less intriguing, is Crime and Punishment, which details corruption in the NYPD in a matter-of-fact way. Some other documentaries I enjoyed were 3 Identical Strangers, Shirkers, Won't You Be My Neighbor, and Minding the Gap. I decided to save drama for last, partly because I'm going to talk about not only my number 1 drama, but my number 1 film overall, and that's First Reformed. I kept expecting something to come along and top it for my favorite of 2018, but nothing put together a complete package in the way this film did. Everything about First Reformed, from the cinematography, to the acting, to the dialogue, is excellent. Ethan Hawke gives perhaps the top performance of the year. It was tough to pick a number 2 in this category, but I went with easily the best looking film of 2018, Roma, from Alfonso Cuarón, the director of Children of Men and Gravity. This is much different from either of those, as it's a deeply personal story set in Mexico and filmed in black and white. It was a Netflix film, but I was lucky enough to be able to see the dazzling cinematography of Roma in theaters. It just doesn't have the tight script of First Reformed, and while Yalitza Aparicio does an amazing job for a first-time actor, she's not on the level of Ethan Hawke here. From there, there's roughly a tie between 2 films that both have fantastic cinematography as well. The first one I'll mention is Moonlight director Barry Jenkins' If Beale Street Could Talk. This film is top-notch stylistically, with gorgeous, fluid camera work and an evocative, string-heavy score that might be my favorite of the year. The second is The Favorite, from Yorgos Lanthimos, the director of The Lobster and Killing of a Sacred Deer. I love the look of The Favorite, especially the distinctive wide-angle lens shots and dissolves. And of course, the performances from the 3 leads are all varied and impressive. From there, I'll go with Blindspotting, a film I definitely didn't expect to be one of my favorites of 2018. It's very funny, and I almost put it in the comedy category, but it shifts tones effortlessly, and the tense ending tips it into drama for me. Just a bit lower, there are 6 films I'll lump together. Vice was a brilliantly edited film with a tremendous lead performance from Christian Bale as Dick Cheney, but there are a few heavy-handed moments. The Polish film Cold War has marvelous high-contrast black and white cinematography and a sparse yet moving narrative. Thoroughbreds is a low-budget psychological thriller that's taut and stylish. It's vaguely Hitchcockian and full of clipped, well-written dialogue. Everybody knows from the director of A Separation, Asghar Farhadi, didn't get that good of a critical reception, but I thought it was underrated. Director Steve McQueen's Widows is a solid heist film that cleverly avoids genre cliches. The Japanese film Shoplifters is a socially conscious film about a family living in poverty that's humorous while also being earnest and humanistic. Unlike so many movies about poverty, it avoids feeling exploitative or preachy. Just a bit below these is yet another directorial debut, 8th Grade, from comedian Bo Burnham. Elsie Fisher gives an authentic lead portrayal of awkward adolescence and is definitely a young actress to watch in the years to come. Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman takes the serious topic of race relations and makes it accessible and satirical, resulting in his best effort in at least a decade. Disobedience, a thought-provoking film about a lesbian relationship in the Orthodox Jewish community, stays away from stereotypes and is a nuanced look at religion and sexuality. I was surprised by how entertaining and funny Green Book was, and less surprisingly, lead actors Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali are both excellent. However, Green Book's somewhat naive handling of race relations keeps it from being among the year's best. Going down just a bit, there are 4 films that I found to be about equal quality. They're all good, but not the finest movies of 2018. A Star is Born has 2 outstanding lead performances, especially from Lady Gaga, but I wasn't a fan of how the film was shot. First Man drags a bit at times, but had great acting as well from Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy, and the moon landing sequence is stunning. Leave No Trace is a quiet film that won't blow you away or anything, but is nonetheless touching and emotional. Creed 2 wasn't as good as the first, but I had no major complaints either. And seeing Dolph Lundgren back as Ivan Drago was lots of fun. Finally, I'll just briefly mention a few more dramas, like 22 July, Burning, The Miseducation of Cameron Post, Tully, The Writer, Madeline's Madeline, The Wife, You Were Never Really Here, and Happy End. If there's anything else I didn't mention, I either didn't see it or didn't like it. Please let me know in the comments if there's anything you think I should have included. Before I finish, I'd like to quickly list off how you can see some of these films if you are subscribed to various streaming services. These apply to US viewers, and I'm not sure what their availability is internationally. On Netflix, you can watch Roma, Infinity War, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, Black Panther, 22 July, The Night Comes for Us, and Shirkers. On Hulu, you can check out Sorry to Bother You, RBG, Minding the Gap, Crime and Punishment, and Active Measures. Amazon Prime has First Reformed, Hereditary, Disobedience, Madeline's Madeline, and Unsane. That's all for this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.